This is my reading chair. It has wings, so I can sit in it, and it's really nice. I finished I Capture the Castle the other day, and I loved it a lot. I have to say, this is now one of my all-time favorite books. This was amazing. First of all, I thought it was really cool because there seemed to be a lot of parallels between Sandra Mortmain and Cassandra Morgeson from Elizabeth Stoddard's The Morgesons, which I'd show it to you, but I think I actually gave it to you for the summer to read. So if you ever get a chance to read that, let me know, because I think it's interesting, besides the fact that they both have very similar names. There is some sort of independent quest for self-identity, I think, in the both of them, and the way that their sisters work, and the kind of, there's some weird sort of tentative parallels between their love stories as well, which I think is cool, and the whole dysfunctional family and how she thinks she knows her family, but she really doesn't. That's a central part of the Morgesons. Kind of like, you think of that family, the Morgesons, as like a group of people who just happen to live together but don't actually know who each other are. And you get a little bit of that, I think, in I Capture the Castle, especially with her father, and how she doesn't really seem to understand him, and her brother as well, how she's always surprised by what he says and what he's been reading and everything like that. She's not self-centered, but her family doesn't play as central a role as, for instance, my family does. Also, I love the fact it was so creepy reading this book, because I know I say this about some characters, but I've never meant it more than in this book. Like, I feel like some of what Cassandra says is literally verbatim thoughts I've had myself, which is really weird. And I bookmarked, well, I didn't bookmark in this book, but I wrote down in my phone a whole bunch of passages that I really liked, that I thought were great. And it was just weird reading things and knowing I'd had the exact same thought, almost in the exact same words, which was even weird. Because you know how sometimes you have a thought but you can't really express it? It wasn't like that. It was like, I've had these thoughts, they've been fully formed, they've been expressed, and here they are in someone else's book, and it was just really odd. So I'll just leave it at that. I think if you read it again sometime soon, you might realize what I'm saying. Maybe you won't. I don't know. It was just weird. I liked also that the love, like, between all the characters was really realistic, you know, that it wasn't cut and dry. It was very complex in the way that, you know, Rose thought she was in love, but she really wasn't. Her whole relationship with Neil, and then the way Cassandra is, because up until that one night with Simon, you really can't tell which way she's going to go. Like, I was thinking, is she going to be with Stephen? Is she going to be with Simon? Is she going to be with Neil? She had relationships with all three of these male characters, and I think all three of them could have developed into something more. It just happened that she chose Simon. So I thought that was cool, because you don't get, a lot of the times you can tell right at the set who's going to be going for who. And that wasn't the case this time, which I really appreciated, because it added a whole lot of complexity to the characters and made them seem more real as people, which I always really like. I love Cassandra's personality as well, just more along the same lines. Her independence and her need for creativity and for life and for drama. How she said at one point, she's like, I couldn't imagine getting married because I can't imagine having a happy ending forever. Like, she thought that would be too boring, that wouldn't be for her. And I think that's great, because I think, you know, as much as people strive for happiness, it's the kind of thing where, like, if you were truly happy all the time, life would be so dull. And, yeah, I just like that about her. I adore Topaz. She is crazy. I love her so much. You know, the idea that this incredibly gorgeous and, like, ethereal woman is, you know, so domestic but doesn't really realize it, and she's still trying to be, you know, artistic. Just everything about her was just ridiculous, and it was awesome. And I loved her, and I thought, you know, 'cause she wasn't ditzy, but she wasn't dull. You know, she was ridiculous. She had her moments, but she also had real moments of, like, love and affection and real common sense to her. Simon's great and all, but there's something about him that I just don't like as much. But I guess that's just my own personal preference. He was a very real character, but at the same time, he just wasn't a character I was very invested in. I like how it was both modern and Victorian, the fact that they lived in the 1930s, but they didn't have electricity in their house and they wrote by candlelight and read by candlelight, and how Rose wore that Victorian dress and everything. The sort of mashup of those two completely different time periods was great. As they've mentioned in the book before, that conversation about which would be better, a little Charlotte Bronte and Jane Austen, or a little Jane Austen and Charlotte Bronte. That was fantastic. I love that. And I like the fact that they have some sensibilities of both authors in this book. There's some common themes in the way in which the story, unfolds, but at the same time it takes place in a completely different era than either of those writers knew. And I thought it was cool because it sort of furthered how classic both those other two authors are and made me appreciate this one a lot more for the way that she created the story. The castle, I want one. That's pretty much it. I want to live where she lives. I thought it sounded like the coolest place on the earth. I thought it was interesting that even though she said that she didn't like Stephen, like she wasn't in love with him, she still had possession over him. When it came to Mrs. FC, Mrs. Fox Cotton, yeah, that's her name, and how she felt sort of jealous, like, he's not mine, but I claim him anyway kind of thing. I thought that was a great added complexity to Cassandra's character, and I think it's very true, because I think a lot of people go through that, you have someone who's interested in you or someone you've broken up with, and you're like, okay, they're going to go on with their life, I'm going to go on with my life. But you still have that sort of possessive feeling toward them, like, I claim them first, they're mine, or they claim me or whatever, so therefore I have more of a right to them than you do, or something like that. And you don't want them to be with other people. You want them. I was thinking about this the other day, how when you split with someone or they go off on their own independent way, regardless if it's a romantic relationship or not, they sort of stop existing in your mind as moving forward. To you, they're always going to be in the same place, or they always should be, because now that you're past them and you're moving forward, and their existence sort of seems to stagnate. Like you can't imagine them having a future because you're not in it. Because let's face it, basically everyone is self-centered to a certain extent, and I think that's a really weird thing that people do, is that you can't imagine people moving on really without you and having their own life outside of you, just because that's the way people are, if that makes any sense at all. And I think that's kind of along the same lines, how Cassandra's always kind of surprised at the direction Stephen's life is taking. I think not so much because it does seem kind of incredible, but also the fact that it exists so far outside of her and her own world. And she just, that kind of boggles her mind. The ridiculousness of some of the scenes. I love the bear scene where Rose is running away in the bear coat. That made me laugh so hard. That was ridiculous. There were a couple other really ridiculous. I love the opening line. I thought that was great. What is it? I sit here writing this in the kitchen sink, I believe. I write this sitting in the kitchen sink, so I was close. I knew I would love that book from the minute I read that sentence. I was like, this is going to be my book. And I also like the whole Topaz communing with nature, and then Cassandra sitting out on the turret or whatever, naked, just lying there. I thought that was really cool. And the whole experience that she describes and feeling it in every single part of her body, like, I think that's neat, and I think that's true. I don't know. When no one's home, I walk around the house naked, at least on the second floor. So yeah, that's pretty much, I think, all I have to say right now. I'm wearing my shirt from A Harry Potter Musical. A Harry Potter sequel premiered last night. My sister and I stayed up until like 2 watching it, and it was phenomenal. It was so great. I loved it. And Jenny loved it too, and we had so much fun. So this shirt came yesterday, and I'm wearing it today in support. It says super mega foxy awesome hot, which I think is great.